Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, welcome everybody. So glad that you're here. So excited about this conversation. My name is Alec Harris. I'm honored to serve as president of GIA Publications. And I have to say, this book that I hold in my hand, The Horizon Leans Forward, I honestly think it's one of the most significant books that GIA has ever published. It is a monumental achievement and a real testament to the team here on this panel. Just so all of you know, just a little logistics. You are on a webinar. That means we won't see your camera, but you can ask questions. There's actually a Q&A panel. So I encourage you to put questions into the Q&A panel or continue to add things into the chat as you see fit. I'll monitor the Q&A and we will definitely ask those questions of the panelists toward the end of the webinar. And in the meantime, the other thing I want to let you know is we have a coupon code for 10% off the book on the GI Music website. So with the code Horizon10, the number 10, you can get 10% off of this amazing, amazing book and incredible resource for wind band directors everywhere and at all levels. So with that start, I'm going to go ahead and first introduce Erik Leung, the head editor of this project, and it couldn't have come at a more important time. The two of us were talking at a Midwest clinic in 2019. This project came together in a way because of the pandemic. They actually had a lot of time on their hands to get this done and get it done in an incredibly important way that they did. And for us to have it out in this moment, unbelievable. So Erik is Canadian, and he's director of bands at Oregon State University, which is outside of Portland, Oregon. And he guides all aspects of the WIN program there. He did get a DMA from Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, and just a master conductor and educator. And with that brief introduction, I'll turn it over to you, Erik.
Hi, thanks so much, Alec. And again, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. It's an honor to have you all here joining us from across North America. I also wanted to thank all of my other co-authors, Alfred Watkins, Courtney Snyder, Alex Shapiro, Rob Taylor, as well as Joni Blackshaw. And it has been a wonderful journey. And as Alec had said, we wrote this during the pandemic, which was insane. And we wrote it in about a year, which is even crazier. And it couldn't have happened without, again, all of these amazing co-authors, as well as all the people that were able to be interviewed for this book as well. And I see a number of the people here as attendees, and I wanted just to thank them, for sharing their stories, for sharing their openness, for wanting to tell their story. And so I really wanted to thank you all from the bottom of my heart. And so I just wanted to just do a little bit of an introduction on how this book kind of came about. And the best way I can tell you is that when I was a little kid, growing up playing band, playing in the band in Canada, I had a great education, but I always, was asking myself, where are the composers that look like me? And this was this little germ of an idea that kind of grew and all the way transitioned into this idea that Alec and I were kind of talking about. Was originally a book about diversity and celebrating women. But it transitioned more and more as Alec and I were talking to having a broader base, not just celebrating women, but, people that are BIPOC as well as LGBTQ communities. And so from there, that's how the book came about. And just to kind of give everyone an idea of how we're going to do this webinar, we're each going to talk a little bit about our chapters. And then between myself and the other co-authors, we're just going to have a roundtable discussion on, how we can program more equitably, how our ensembles can appropriate, or how our ensembles can embrace diversity. And then what are the challenges, that we continue to face in our field. And then kind of lastly, some advice, some positive advice that we can all take back into our classrooms and into our rehearsals. So the very first person I'm going to introduce is Alfred Watkins. And Alfred, did you want to share a little bit about yourself and your chapter?
Sure. Thank you, Eric, and thank you everyone at GIA for sponsoring not only this I think meaningful book, but this webinar. Excuse me. My name is Alfred Watkins. I'm a retired high school band director. I'm a 66-year-old heterosexual man who lives here in Marietta with my wife. We have 2 sons, adult sons, and I live in Georgia. Georgia is in the northeast corner of the country, but if you think you know where we are, you may not. We border 5 states and the Atlantic. So we're way over here in the corner. And we are part of the Southern tradition of America. And Eric came to me and asked me to share my experiences as a 66-year-old Black man having grown up in the South. It was the most difficult, the writing of this was the most difficult challenge of my professional career. I'm not an author, and so putting it down in prose was not the easiest thing for me. But finally, I think that I'm flattered to have been asked to collaborate with wonderful individuals, and I've learned so much, and I'm not afraid to learn. So as you read our stories in our book, don't be afraid to learn. I found out that I'm a BIPOC about 5 minutes ago. I've not used that word to identify myself. Thank you so much, Eric. But I'm still learning, and it still is a part of the fabric of what we do. We're part of the new America. I hear very often, I don't want to talk politics, and people say don't talk politics around people that you don't know. We were founded as a country with political intent. And so politics and race and culture and gender equity has followed us for 400 years of our existence as African American in the country, and even longer as citizens. So I don't like to not call it politics. It's all kind of interwoven. It sounds like you would like to muzzle me by not discussing my ethnicity and my culture and my gender and the gender of others. So this new version of America that we have now as a result of the spring and the summer and winter that we've gone through as a world gives us a chance to reset. If we don't take the opportunity to reset, then we'll just kind of glue this time into about a year from now and throw everything out. But the George Floyd situation and the murders that have happened in our country, the Me Too generation and the LGBTQ community, to be able to say the word queer for the first time and not feel like I'm being derogatory to another group, allows for us to grow. The expression of Latinx, as opposed to Latinos or Hispanics or whatever we choose to do, is a growth that we need to do. And quickly, I'm a native of Jackson, Georgia. You've seen my town. It's a town square with 4 traffic lights. And in the South, we have Confederate soldiers that guard the Northeast and the Southwest quadrant. And underneath that sign, it said, "Our heroes." Yet when I watched the Klan march through my town to burn people out of homes, they weren't my heroes. And so I was trained in America that I was supposed to be of another sect, of another group. And so when I came to my small town, I saw all of those separate but unequal facilities. I was born in the year 1954. The year the United States Supreme Court desegregated the schools in America, yet it took the South and many other parts of America 16 years to follow the Supreme Court ruling. The government gave them another year. And so my junior year in high school, 16 years after Thurgood Marshall won that Supreme Court ruling, they desegregated the schools. And the first thing we did when we put the schools together is that we took exams. And we found out in my little small town of a school that was 50-50 Black, white, that our test scores were about the same. The A students there were A students there. And I learned very quickly that I didn't have a tail, that I didn't have, and that our separate but unequal facilities didn't affect my ability to grasp information. I had wonderful teachers in the Black school, and I was able to stand up and be counted and be the exact same as all the peers around me. That little one window gave me a look inside the rest of America, and boy, was it not helpful. But it was a horrible time My chapter is entitled A Tale of Two Americas, taken from the Charles Dickens story of A Tale of Two Cities. And so I saw two Americas. You've not lived in the classroom until you've seen in the social studies class, all of the presidents of the United States as a child, and you didn't see yourself. And much like Erik noted, when you would hear classical music or music that they considered to be legitimate, or the classrooms considered to be serious, it didn't include the music of my people. And all the governors of my state for our history have been white males. So when you see the world from my vantage point, you see a different world. Fortunately for me, my grandfather, Duffy, who was a sharecropper, gave me his musical ear. And my parents taught me, whatever I put in here, no one can take away from me. So I understood that. So I came from a deep root of the Southern Baptist Church gospel. I knew all four of my grandparents, which was an anomaly and quite unusual. I graduated from high school in 1972. I had the option of going to PWIs. If you don't know, those are called predominantly white institutions from where I'm from. And I chose not to because it didn't appear that they wanted us in those schools. So I matriculated at a lovely school in Tallahassee called Florida A&M University. It was famous for its marching band, but for me, it's even more famous for a sheltering and a development of my mind. I saw Black PhDs walking along the campus every day. I saw men and women that were quite accomplished who looked like me and gave me the confidence that I could do anything that anyone else in the world could do without even having to tell me. So I graduated with a fine music education background, and I was quite a good trumpet player. I was a classical player, and I went to Florida A&M to college, much like my high school band director, and I came in contact with great administrators, great teachers. It was a great musical experience. Taught for 6 years at Murphy High School in the inner city of Atlanta. And before I move off to the last of the years, one of the things that I'm reminded of today, there's a guy that came through named James Camp. He taught middle school band. He's about 20 years my senior. He's passed away. He taught in the ghetto, much like myself, just a really impoverished community. But he didn't have the first inkling that those kids couldn't learn. I went to James's rehearsal one day, and he had the ghetto that I taught. We taught in had 100% free and reduced lunch. And James had his foot underneath two little seventh grade kids playing bass clarinet, and they were soiled. They were not well kept, much like the kids what I had taught. They weren't well kept, and he was teaching them how to read 6/8 on the bass clarinet because he had just shifted them to soprano. And he was encouraging them, and I looked at them, and they weren't well kept. And I said, they'll never learn this. And when he finished a little section of those two kids, he said to me, they'll get it. They'll be ready by March. And I learned from him and others that the students that I taught could do anything. And the expectations that people had that I grew up was not a part of it. So 6 years later, I went off to Lassiter High School and picked up a program at Lassiter. In the second year, that was 99.9% Caucasian. The night of my very first football game, there was a Ku Klux Klan rally. I was the subject of the rally. The stories of just of hatred and discrimination. I was called the N-word by some youngsters passing by my first day on the job. I was 28 years old. I was in graduate school, and I was learned, and I had not been called the N-word since I was a child. And then lastly, I had a wonderful career at Lassiter, taught 10,000 high school students. When I left, the school was about 5% other. It was about 95% Caucasian. It was a very affluent community in the suburbs of Atlanta. About 17 years into my profession, and I'll leave with this. An assistant principal thought that I was just like him. He was white. And he turned to me and he said, you know what, Alfred, I don't think I could teach Black kids, do you? With my background being what it is, he had the gall to think that I was like him. And I was insulted to the nth degree. And I said, yes, I could teach any child that had an instrument if you give me enough time. And I would love them all as well. And that was my philosophy through it. So when you go back to your classrooms, don't be afraid of people that are different than you may happen to be. And don't be afraid of them. Don't be afraid to go to someone and ask them a question that you don't know, like BIPOC, or I can say queer, and I think it's okay. And you learn by being around people, but we've not been a good America. And we've not been true to our Constitution. And the insurrection that we just shared about a month ago was a culmination of not such a good America. And the world sees it now, and we all see it. So the new America that we have, let's all embrace it. I'm sorry I took up a little bit more extra time than I was asked to, but thank you so much for allowing me to be here. Buy the book and read it and share it with your friends. It's a wonderful, wonderful book.
Thank you so much, Alfred. And yeah, kind of just reiterating what Alfred was talking about is that, for all of us authors, it was quite an extension, for us to kind of step out of what we know, to kind of figure out and kind of wrestle with these ideas of identity, of gender identity, of sexuality, of even of culture. And so my chapter really kind of revolved around this idea of how do we support Asian students that want to become music educators. For me, as a Asian Chinese born Canadian, I struggled a lot when I told my mom and dad that I wanted to go into music. And I was able to interview some really amazing people for my chapter. I interviewed Jennifer Jolly, Viet Kuang, Jason Schwan, and Travis Cross from UCLA. And all of us, were wrestling with these ideas, and all of us had very different experiences, in our chapter. And you can read about it, about how every one of them in some way struggled with this whole idea of Asian identity, of the ideas of face and how it relates to honor, the idea of this model minority myth that we often struggle with as Asians, and then the idea of being a perpetual foreigner, in the world that we live in the country that we live in. No matter how much we want to hide our skin color, always means that we're going to be a minority. We're always going to be a perpetual foreigner in our class. And to kind of sum it up, and I wanted to make sure that I give time for everyone else to talk about their chapters, but one of the things that we really talked about in our chapter was the need for more representation. I believe Travis Cross has a wonderful website, a Facebook site that says that there's only a handful of Asian band directors in the post-secondary world. And on top of that, there's I think only less than a handful of Asian women band directors in the post-secondary world. So really this need for representation is so important as we move forward with this new America, as Alfred has called it. So I'm gonna just stop there, and I'm gonna transition to Rob Taylor, and he's gonna talk a little bit about his chapter as well as introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. I'm also really grateful to be here today. And the title of my chapter for this book is Out in Front, Visibility and Queer Identity in the Wind Band. And I had kind of a working thesis, which was just an idea that visibility, having been so important to me in my own growth, was really essential in us achieving broader representation in future generations of performers, of conductors, composers, and artist teachers who engage in the wind band field. When Erik asked me to be a potential contributor to the book, I have to admit it was both exciting and really terrifying, because I thought, how can I possibly represent in some ways, or serve as kind of ambassador in this particular publication for such a diverse group of people who identify as LGBTQIA2S+, and that queer alphabet soup is just overwhelming. And Alfred, queer is great. That's a great all-encompassing term, though not everybody identifies that way, right? And so I thought this is going to be a real challenge for me, even more daunting as a gay, white, cisgender male who admittedly has a ton of privilege. And so I thought to myself, how can I kind of use this privilege to lose it in a way? And my approach was to try to amplify voices that represent people in different ages, different career stages, different focus areas, from public school, post-secondary, community LGBA bands, military bands, and people of diverse gender and sexual orientation, but especially to be inclusive in this chapter of people who might identify in more than one area of underrepresentation. And you'll notice that the book only includes works by composers who have some intersectional identity. So they are both queer and have some other form of underrepresented identity in the book. I posed a series of questions to 20 people to try to keep a diverse outlook. And I'm really proud that 13 of 20 of the interviewees have some kind of intersectionality that they identify in multiple areas that the book explored. Though there is still a lot of room to hear from others, particularly transgender voices. We had only one contributor, Jennifer Martin, whose story was so courageous and compelling, just absolutely amazing. I see many of the people actually in the chat at today's webinar, which is heartwarming. The themes that emerged in those interviews are the things that some that you might expect and others that you might be surprised in 2021 to hear. But the idea of coming out being a fluid process that's ongoing, the real significance of having visible role models. And I would say that is the #1 thing that came through as a theme. The ongoing challenges of encountering homophobia in the workplace. You heard Alfred talk about the N-word. One of the F words came up very, very frequently in my interviews. The kind of unconscious decisions that guide people's careers when you're queer, including especially where you choose to center your work or feel comfortable centering your work. The importance of having an informal space in professional circles to network with other queer identifying persons. And one thing that I think is for me was really heartening was to hear how important it was for people to participate in ensembles. And as queer persons, always feeling welcome in that environment had such a big impact on everybody's life in the people that I interviewed. The resulting stories were informative and sometimes heartbreaking, but truly amazing. And I basically was hoping to curate and share those stories so that hopefully people would see themselves reflected in them, or might use them as a source of solace or of comfort or inspiration, or to learn how to be more supportive of people that are in the queer community.
Awesome, thanks, Rob. And it's a great chapter that Rob wrote, and all of the contributors, again, just thank you, for the openness and for the vulnerability that you have shown, to the world. So thank you so much. The next author I wanted to introduce is my good friend, Courtney Snyder. Courtney, do you want to talk about your chapter a little bit?
Sure, thank you, Eric. Thank you, GAI. Thank you, GIA. I can get my letters in the right order, and Alec as well, just for putting this book together. And it truly was a joy to work with everybody on this panel right now. Just having some interestingly timed Zoom chats because of all our disparate time zones. But it was inspirational. It allowed me an interesting perspective to even reflect back on what I was writing about. So my chapter is about women. So the title is called Trailblazers: 5 pioneering female band directors recount their journeys over the last 50 years. So this really came about from a Midwest presentation that I'd done in 2019. So it was like right after, like Eric talked to me very shortly after that presentation. And I'd interviewed, it was to celebrate the 50th anniversary of WBDI, which is Women Band Directors International, which I'm now president. And I had to really think about, okay, well, we could just simply ask exactly the same questions and maybe go into a little bit more depth because you have some more time to be able to write out the prose. But I also wanted to be able to navigate some of the issues that I still feel like in the community of women, where we're still certainly less than the majority. I mean, we're, especially in higher ed, we're even, small, even like 10 to 15%. there's still a lot of issues in terms of how women relate to one another, and there's still an element of scarcity that can come through, where the scarcity causes a competition, and we all know the mindset of like, well, don't be involved with women because women are catty, and there's this weird like anti-women mindset that women have, and I've had that even myself. I was kind of like, I'm one of the guys, and I don't want to get along with a bunch of gals because I don't want to deal with the drama, and that is us. That still exists today. And there's still that mindset that women have to navigate. I've even talked to other women. They're like, well, I feel like I've been burned more by women than I have been burned by men. And this is all normal situations for scarcity. You know, when you feel like there's only a limited amount of opportunities for you, then you're all going to fight against each other, right? And learning how to just bring all these things out in the open, to me, is recognizing those, you know, we are in many ways limitless. Like the scarcity issue is something we also put on ourselves. And I'm so excited to see the blossoming and the change in so many more people, women and BIPOC and queer, just coming into the fold and being comfortable and accepted in this role. We certainly have a long way to go. But one of the things that in particular to me that was exciting about this book is, as I was coming into this field, you know, when I went to college, I thought I was going to be a high school choir director. I had no plans to become a band director. And it wasn't until I was in like my junior and senior year, I was like, do I want to do orchestra band? And I ultimately came to band. But my question a lot was that I'd never seen a woman band director. I had a woman choir director and women orchestra directors, but never a women band director. And even when I went into grad school, I still had never seen a woman. And for me, I never had a question that I couldn't do it. It was just more, could I do it and have the life that I wanted? As in, could I actually have a personal life and have a family? And I know that so many women ask that same question because it feels like it's an overwhelming job. And it is. But thankfully, the world is changing a little bit in terms of how, you know, relationships can also work, right? And we don't feel like we have to be so codified into roles with relationship to that. Part of the reason why I can do what I do is because I have a supportive partner who understands and can be taking care of the kids right now that I can hear them behind me, and putting them to sleep while I'm doing this. Like, that's really necessary. You have to have that kind of balance because, I mean, I can't imagine it would be possible to do all of that. And for anybody who's single and raising kids and doing this, I just bow down to all of you because seriously, that's a tremendous amount of work. But what I didn't understand in writing this, in initially coming up in this field, was how many women were there, and because they were kind of hidden, and I knew my perspective, and I knew just where I was, so I had a very limited perspective in terms of my understanding of what women were in this field. And having interviewed the 5 women in this chapter, starting with Gladys, who is amazing, and I think she's 95 years old, or 96, she's in that realm, and still like, just like, she's just wicked smart. She's just incredible, and still like so on it, even at this stage. But her and Judy Grimes and Susan Cressup and Barbara Lambrecht and Roxanne Stevenson, whom really Roxanne was the one I've been most recently able to know, and hearing all their stories, it, for one, makes me feel incredibly blessed because I didn't have to deal with some of the battles that they had to deal with. I mean, I never was told in an interview that, well, we don't hire women. Now, I had been told, well, you only got hired because you're a woman. And that's, it's you know, another way of putting you down. But to see these kind of battles and what they had to deal with, and to hear their stories of having to basically go into the rural schools because they wouldn't be able to teach anywhere else, but also following along with what Alfred said, any kid can learn. And they never settled for, oh, well, I'm in this less than school, and being able to like rise these kids to this level of playing that was on par with other schools that had the money and had the resources. They were willing to put in the time and the work. And I find their stories very inspirational, and it's made me realize how many more stories are out there. And that's one of the things I really value about this book is the opportunity to share so many stories. It's important for us to have many stories, not just one, because our students aren't one story. Our students are not a monolith. They need to understand different perspectives. And that's one of the things that I value most writing in this chapter, but also reading the entire book and also working with everybody here. So thank you for the opportunity.
And, just to echo what Courtney said, like, it's amazing the stories, that have come out from this book, and these deeply personal stories. And so the next two authors you should be very familiar with. We will begin with Alex Shapiro. And Alex, do you want to take us through your chapter for a little bit?
Sure. And like everybody, I got to tell you what a joy it has been to work with these colleagues, to see GIA and Alec be so supportive of such an important set of topics. This has been very, very special. This is a highlight of the year, I know, for all of us. My chapter, it's called Reaching Out and Bringing Women In. Erik had asked me to incorporate my personal experience in my chapter. So I use that basically as a pivot point for a kind of theme and variation, so to speak. And my chapter is sort of in two sections. The first addresses a really long list of troubling bias issues head on. I don't pull any punches. And it discusses a lot of ways to raise awareness of the problems and to help improve equity in our field. I mean, pretty straight ahead. But I really wanted to delineate this, like just lay it all out. This is what we're dealing with. A lot of stuff gets spoken of, some of it doesn't. It was a chance for me to connect the dots with some of these things. For instance, the power of technology to grant access, which grants equity economically, artistically, all kinds of ways, obviously, in terms of everybody having access to a career. All these things have shifted over time significantly. And the second section is sort of a how-to, almost like a how-to manual, using a three-pronged approach of, talking about topics from music to community to technology and business, all these different ways, all these different aspects that make up a career. What are the three prongs of dealing with it? Well, the first prong for me was, okay, if you are somebody who's already reasonably established and has a bunch of relationships with peers, what can you do? And how can you do it to reach out and bring those women in? How do you identify these talented women and get them in, as I like to say, under the tent, help them with their careers? If you are that woman, if you are someone who is looking to, really, bring up your career, what can you do that is going to help you accomplish that? And then my third prong was basically looking inward at my past decades of my career and life and saying, okay, here's what I did. This is how I did it. This is what worked. Now, I got to tell you, if in hindsight, I really missed an opportunity to describe the things that are definitely not a good idea. Like, I should do a whole nother chapter on here's what not to do. But anyway, all the good, because I wanted to be really encouraging, so I didn't go there. I didn't go to the here's where I fell on my patootie, But I basically list a lot of things that I found that really worked and I thought would work for everybody else. And interestingly, even though the chapter is about women and women in the band world, pretty much every single thing I write about is true for any composer looking to broaden the scope of their career, and good for anybody who's in a position where they're trying to help anybody else. This is true for men. It's true for people of all colors and backgrounds and everything. It just happens that the focus in this case, of course, is on women in the band world. So basically, like unlike a lot of people, I was raised in the middle of Manhattan in the 1960s and 70s by two really progressive parents. I mean, they were so progressive, they wouldn't even let me have a Barbie doll because they thought it was sexist and, just objectifying, right? That's how progressive my household was. And so I get my activism gene from my father, Ivan, my late father, who was on the board of Planned Parenthood and the ACLU and, many boards. He was an incredible social activist when he wasn't making a living as an attorney. And the opening line of my chapter is actually a quote from him, which is basically saying, Alex, you can be anything you want to be as long as you're good enough and as long as you work hard. And I thought that was a very reasonable statement, and I've always sort of carried that with me. And I describe my chapter as, kind of the opening part of it as the lucky bubble. of a life that was emotionally supported, even though my parents had really no clue, what I was doing. They were very, arm's length, but they were supportive. They didn't thwart me or dissuade me. They just weren't involved in my life, but they were cool with it. So I had a lucky bubble of that kind of a background, and also where, as far as I knew, I wasn't being discriminated against. Everything kept going really well, which I realize is unusual. If I was being discriminated against, it was happening behind my back, and I didn't, I wasn't aware of it because everything was going fine for me. But all of that meant that I wanted, as was said before, to speak up. I think Rob was talking about this, to realize your privilege and to speak up loudly on behalf of here's what things should be like, and let's make that happen because those of us who've had a positive experience know what it's supposed to be like, know what careers should be supported like. So anyway, I hope my chapter is a guide in a sense for women, about, and anybody, but women in this case, about standing up and speaking up and not being afraid to represent yourselves in a very strong and positive manner, and to engage in the community around you and build relationships and help everybody else around you. Courtney was talking about competition, and I say this all the time, that we are not in competition with each other. The pie can have endless numbers of slices. Just, keep baking pies. I don't know, whatever analogy you want to make, but you're not in competition with each other. We all have to support each other, and the better that every one of us does, the better for the arts, the better for our music field, the better for education. So we are a tribal community. So I'll stop there.
No, thanks, Alex. And I think it's so cool, just talking about this idea that, we're standing up for each other, and I think that's one of the themes, the subtext that I get from the book is that even though the chapters are very different, or there's many different points of view, we're all standing up for each other. And I think that's a great little nugget to kind of keep in mind. All right, so zooming all the way in from Australia is Joni Blackshaw.
Hi, it's really good to be here. I really hope this works. My internet connection is a bit unstable, so let's hope that my words from Australia get across to you. So my upbringing couldn't have been more different to yours, Alex. I was in a big, wide open space in the middle of rural outback Australia where, it was flat and there was not many people around. And my dad was a school teacher and he was in tiny one teacher schools, and we lived in the school residence next to the one teacher school, and there were no neighbours. And I actually think that's quite an interesting allegory for my life as a wind band composer, because there's not a lot of wind bands around me, and there's been very few opportunities for me to work with, especially professional level wind bands. So a lot of my life for me as a composer has been writing for my own students. And I would have those eclectic ensembles of 7 saxophones and 1 trumpet kid who thinks he knows everything. And then that beginner girl on trombone, and then, 17 flautists, and none of them can read music properly. And then a percussion section with, 12 students up there who just all want to beat each other to death with the mallets and things. I've been the band director of those ensembles, and I've ascertained that they all have different learning styles, they all have different music careers, and that they all have different ways of finding music, and that I, as the composer and the teacher, had to create resources that worked for them. So my chapter is very much about, I've heard a lot of fantastic words today. Alfred talked about my students can do anything, and Rob talked about having a space where everyone feels welcome. And Courtney really talked about women having to navigate, and and Alex really talked about access. So we've got this kind of thread. And so for me, this is where I think the music becomes really important. And yes, we need to select repertoire that represents composers of all sorts of different persuasions, but we also need to think about the directors and the students. And we also need to make sure that the focus remains on the music itself, because I think diversity and playing music by diverse composers is the answer to really progressing wind band repertoire. I think it's what we've been really looking for to enable wind band repertoire, especially at that middle school and high school level, and really breaking through the membrane of some of the more traditional ways we've been writing for band, and really getting some new colors out of the ensemble, getting some new textures, some new timbres, some new ways of just manipulating this glorious collection of instruments that we have in a wind band and doing something else with them. For the last 100 years, we've kind of followed this fabulous formula that pulls out this wonderful balance and tone, and it makes our hearts sing when we hear music written that way. But there are so many different diverse composers at the moment writing with such a different voice, with such a different, response and a different attitude to the way that they're going to treat the ensemble. And we've got an opportunity right now to not only make wind band accessible to everyone and a safe place for everyone and a place that everyone can call home, but we can also progress wind band repertoire and keep it relevant to 21st century music education and 21st century wind band repertoire, and really just make it something so much better and so much stronger than where we are now. Sorry, got a bit passionate there.
No, that's great, Joni. And actually, your chapter really takes us into this whole kind of roundtable discussion. And I think the very first question, that I wanted to pose to all of you is, do we have any strategies, for programming more diverse composers, for more diverse repertoire? And so I think this is a time that, all of the authors can just open up their or unmute themselves, and we could just talk. And I'm just going to moderate the Q&A box as well. So if you have any questions, just put it into the Q&A.
Let me just jump in and say one of the most amazing things about this book is about half of it is repertoire, and it's all organized by diverse composers. So it's a great source of ideas for learning repertoire and a great kind of start for programming music in wind band.
And with that, I just wanted to shout out, I see one of my grad students here, Sydney Bonnell. I just wanted to thank her and my other two grad students, for Jennifer and Kyle, for helping me organize all of these composers. One of the questions was, how did we find them? We were really lucky. The Institute for Composer Diversity has a huge listing of composers, and Alfred Watkins suggested a whole bunch of composers that I didn't even know about. And then just kind of talking to my friends, David Strickler over at the Wind Repertory Project has a bunch of repertoire that we just pulled from. So yeah, that's how we were able to gather all of these composers. And the one thing that we did want to mention is that we did ask for their consent, to be a part of this book. And so you may notice that there's some composers that are like, obviously, BIPOC composers that are not listed. Chances are they just wanted their names not to be included as part of that. So. Cool. So I think, Judy, we can just kind of go from your chapter and talk about, programming more diverse composers. So I don't know if anyone has more ideas about that.
Yeah, my whole chapter is really about looking through the lens of the way the composer approaches the wind band. So I know that Kevin Day is with us here, and he's one of the people that I spoke to. And Kevin, when he starts writing a brand new piece, he starts with rhythm. I call him a rhythm first composer, and he really gets a lot of his rhythms down, and then he applies his pitch. A timbre first composer, and I sort out all my colors, and the end result of my music next to Kevin's, there's forgive the pun, but there's daylight between them. It's in the wind band. And when I started to realize that, I thought there is so much opportunity here for us to not only think about the composer themselves, but also the way that they are writing music. And there's great teaching moments here. If you've melody first and one's rhythm first and one's more timbre or texture first, and I know then you're reaching students who are hearing music that way. We kind of all, interpret and hear music a little bit differently. And if you've just been programming music by composers who are mostly melody first, how many students have access it? Maybe they're more rhythmic orientated, maybe they're more harmonic orientated, and perhaps we're not including that in our repertoire selections.
Anyone else? That's awesome. Thanks, Jodi.
Sure. Well, in terms of I love what Jodi was saying, by the way. And in terms of finding repertoire, Jodi has been at the forefront of creating a page, doing something that any one of you guys watching this can do. She created a page that lists is an aggregated set of links and explanations of people's music, of women's music and diverse music for these different grade levels of band music. And I've got a page called Programming Resources that does that as well. Everybody can put up a page themselves to help spread information. One of the things that I mentioned in the book is that one of my favorite things that we've all seen is like on Facebook. Most of us tend to be on Facebook for whatever reason. And it's a great gathering, the watering hole, so to speak, online. And when somebody just puts up on a post, hey, I'm looking for such and such kind of a piece by such and such kind of a composer, guess what? Not only do they get a response from a gazillion people of, oh, check out this piece, check out this composer, check this out, but then everybody else on the thread learns too. And that has been, social media has been one of the most effective ways to share the beauty of repertoire that none of us necessarily knew about. That's how we find out. That's how we explore. So it's easy to do. It doesn't cost anything. And in addition to ICD, there are all kinds of other links. If you go to my programming resources page, it's linked right on the front and center, right when you start to scroll down my homepage. If you go there, you'll see links to a whole slew of resources.
Awesome. Rob, Courtney, Alfred.
May
Sorry,
I?
Alfred, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I think those are wonderful, wonderful statements and wonderful ideas. I think what we have to look at, teachers, is how were we trained, and what did we study in college? And we studied the music. You can actually earn a terminal degree in the United States in most places and not study the music of 5 of the 7 continents, or most of the world, and earn terminal degrees. And so the setup is to study the music of white American, white Europeans. And we were brainwashed into that. And it was I don't know whether it was intended or not, but nevertheless, it's how we got to where we were. And we talk about, let's find good music by women and other composers, but I want to make sure it's good music. Well, Haydn wrote over 100 symphonies. I can't sing the expositions from the first movement of all of them. I can get 2 or 3 of them pretty well. But the point I'm making is he was a wonderful composer. So we have to look inside of ourselves and see, do our musical selections represent a broad breadth of what we didn't study? What we didn't study? Is there a composer in our programs that represent as many different facets of musical styles and persons that we can, so we can tell the story of a movement of Rosa and tell Mrs. Parks' story on her anniversary of her birth, which is today. And so we can tell the story in a new version of America, but we have to look inside of ourselves and realize how we were trained. We were trained in legitimate music. We call it legit for short, and that everything was serious, which makes by definition everything else non-serious, which makes the music of Duke Ellington and Count Basie and Thelonious Monk not serious music. And that is the training of most of us and perhaps the world, but certainly in our country. So work against your training and make sure you want to program music that is a potpourri, that has many slices, as a friend of mine taught me today.
Rob, Courtney, did you want to jump in as well?
I could jump in. Yeah, I mean, the idea of allies and allyship is such an important idea, in the queer community. And when I think about that with regard to programming, I think of the ways that we can be allies for these underrepresented voices. And among those, one I think is to really encourage young composers of diverse backgrounds. So doing some reading sessions, or encourage even people within our ensembles to do some composition, and to provide opportunities by doing works that allow that kind of creative composing within the ensemble. It can really, really build future generations of composers of greater diversity. I think having residencies with composers from underrepresented areas is really, really super important. I mean, Alex and Jody have spent a lot of time with me at University of British Columbia, and those kinds of sessions are really enriching. And I know for a fact that students who have that kind of moment where they see an ignition moment where they're like, that's who I want to be, it can be so powerful for them to interact directly with the composer. So not just programming the works, but bring in the composer and be part of the birth process of that work. Jody has an amazing article that she wrote on that in our work together, and working together with composers of diverse backgrounds to help their works, not just in the beginning, but through the process, the birthing process, I think is important. And then also just being an ally by championing great repertoire. When you come across a piece that you just absolutely love, that you share it on social media, you share it with your friends, and you really put it out there. You program it every time you do an honor band, or suggest it every time you're at a festival. Just being a champion and an ally, I think, is really, really helpful.
Thanks, Rob. I totally understand. And I think sometimes it can be even just a simple thing. Like here at Oregon State, we just committed to programming at least one work, either by a woman or an LGBTQ composer or a BIPOC composer, for every one of our concerts. And I think it'd just be as simple as that. Courtney, did you want to add anything?
That's actually how I kind of got started into diverse programming. Was I kind of made a goal. I initially started with it with women composers. So I just made a goal that I was going to have a woman on every concert. And I wasn't going to talk about it. I was just going to do it. And then it grew into there. It was like, now I want BIPOC representation. And I want to change that mindset for me. And the challenge was that because we aren't trained in this music, we have to do a lot of the learning on ourselves. So you have to spend a lot of hours in the summer or whenever you're doing your programming to just learn new music, search through programming sites. I often go to the CBDNA report, because sometimes they're putting out programming, and so I can see what other places are programming just to see, okay, what works don't I know, and let me learn about this person. Having sites like Alex's and Jody's sites, as well as the ICD site, like those are great places to be able to go. But I also want to push it, because this deals with a couple of the questions that are related to what's in the Q&A. The idea of tokenism, it can definitely get to that point where it feels like, well, you're just plugging in a dot, right? And making sure, well, then I've got it covered. You have to, for one, find a piece that you feel committed to. I don't think anybody should just be programming things just to program them. That doesn't make any sense to me, because how would I teach that piece well if I don't feel like this piece communicates an idea or has craftsmanship to it? So that does take time. But to me, I don't see that as tokenism as much as just going out and learning more, and just finally finding something that I want to say, yes, I want to champion this piece. I think that commissioning pieces that fill voids, don't just commission somebody to write the same thing they already wrote. Like you could think Haydn wrote 104 symphonies. How many of those are really unique? So let's actually commission people to fill a void. I think about the music that connects to a lot of people who aren't in our music education and who aren't in our band classes, right? So if we're struggling, we want to get those, well, then let's commission composers to work maybe with a local, maybe mixed genres together. Why do we have to have such disparate kinds of music? Put improvisation in together with band music, with what's happening through there. Put in somebody, if you have if you're in an area that has a tremendous amount of indie folk rock, or has a lot of R&B, or has a lot of rap, reach out to those people and say, hey, could we come together and could we try to come up with a piece and find something that could work? To me, that could be changing the idea that we've been locked in for 100 years, to finally be stop stifling creativity and recognize music is music and there's great music everywhere, we should be able to make that kind of music, and we should be championing that. And along the lines of the creativity component, I do think that we need to be allowing our students to have more contributions besides just what we're telling them, that they're playing the right note or the right rhythm. Like, how can we allow them to be part of that creative process? And maybe we should be commissioning works that give that kind of flexibility and room. Because if we are a Eurocentric heavy field, which we are, if you think back in the time of Mozart and Haydn, they were all improvisers as well as like musicians. They could play, they could compose, they did everything. And by us siloing ourselves, I think we've limited a lot of the potential to reach out. So maybe we need to expand our idea of what musicianship is and what our idea of being in a band is.
And Courtney, thanks so much for those ideas. And I'm going to transition your talk about the classroom. And I want to thank everyone for all these awesome questions in the Q&A. And so the first question comes from Paul, and he asks, what's the most impactful and sustainable thing I can do as a director to bring awareness and equity to my classroom? It's a really deep question.
I'll start. Yes, Paul, thank you for the question. Study the cultures of America. I once took a drive out to the Grand Canyon with my family and passed through Phoenix. And I'd not been in the Native American culture very much, although half of the counties in Georgia are named after Indians. But we know the Trail of Tears. And when I was out there, I wondered whether I could teach the Native Americans very well that were walking along the street. And the answer came back to me, not initially because I wouldn't understand the culture of the people very well, but you give me 6 months and let me study everything about the Native American culture. So I would say study the culture of Americans, and as you do that, you will begin to embrace a broader culture as opposed to the culture that you may be familiar with. No different than learning a new word or two tonight, a new idea.
Awesome, thanks, Alfred. Anyone else? Cool. Giovanni Santos, fellow composer. Oh, sorry, Jody, did you want to add to
No, it's okay. I just wanted to say just a really simple thing. Just as I've just returned to teaching in a school, and I've noticed that the students call all the male teachers sir, and they call all the female teachers miss. And a simple thing, and I went to my school principal and I said, is there any reason why it isn't sir and ma'am as opposed to sir and miss? Because it instantly felt like, you know, there was this different way that we were looking at the teachers who were teaching across the school. And for me, another really simple thing was calling students guys all the time, that everyone is guys. And maybe just in our everyday it's just something I just was thinking of it when you asked that question. It was something that's become very personal to me just in the last week, and just a couple of small things that we could possibly do in our language and in our school culture as a whole to make sure that we're talking respectfully to every teacher and to every student.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And to kind of talk further about that, you know, like maybe even having some sort of like gender neutral dress code, you know, for your concerts, you know, to extend it that far, you know, something to think about further. Giovanni Santos asks, it's such a beautiful book, thanks. Thank you for sharing these important and amazing stories. Because of systemic racism, many students are still missing out on music education. Do you have any ideas on how we can overcome these injustices and strive for a music for all community? That's an awesome question. Thanks, Gio. Anyone else want to jump on this?
I feel like a little bit of what I was trying to ask kind of relates to what he was talking about, of being able to reach out to more of those students that aren't involved. I think it ultimately has to come from, one, what we're doing in our classrooms. And this does also relate to a later question about the competition aspect, because that does have a huge influence over the things that we feel pressured to teach, right? We have a test coming up, so we've got to teach to the test instead of teaching a student. So there is going to have to be some cultural change that's going to have to come about in order for that to probably end, or at least be adjusted where it's not the dominating feature as to what it is to be in a music program. But I think I mean, what Alfred had mentioned, just knowing the culture, you really do need to know the culture of students first and foremost. And I taught in a school where actually I taught in a predominantly minority school, and I really had to do a lot of learning. And if I was to go back and do it again, I would do it differently. I would be better. But that mindset is really important. I mean, there's beauty in the cultures of everybody, and there's beauty in our own experience as well. But I think it's important for us to know, like, who are all these amazing people that are in our school? Get to know them, and then find out what connects to them, and then either commission that, find the repertoire that draws in that story, and make that part of their experience. I think it could be quite beautiful.
You're here. You're here. Thanks, Courtney. John Franklin asks, do you find that you still have to be conscientious about and or stifle any parts of your identity in order to fit in or be accepted? Alfred.
Yes. Yeah. I've worn a mask in the classical music world for most of my years, and it's a very uncomfortable mask that I don't wear anymore, and I understand why I had to wear it. So that's a yes for probably most of us. But the new America will accept us for who we are. It's just going to take time. It'll take time for the world to turn, so to speak.
Nice. Anyone else?
This is perhaps a strange thing to say a little bit, but I've been told by a lot of other women, that they stifle being a mom. They don't talk about it. They don't talk about their kids. They don't want other people to know why they're missing a meeting, or that they have to go pick up their kids or whatnot. So I fortunately am in a place where I just haven't done that. I have had moments where I think about it. It's a part of my identity, but it's just like, it's totally, I mean, in some ways it's like, if a guy says that, it's no big deal. It's like, oh, he's being a good dad. And the mom does it, oh, she can't do her job. And so a lot of women do struggle with that element, where they're afraid to just be honest about, this is the life that I lead, and this is the things I have to make choices about.
Right.
Or just to say, y'all shouldn't schedule something at 6 o'clock when it's dinner time, or at 4 o'clock when we got to go get the kids from school. Like, those are things that I think we can also be just responsible.
And, you know, I'm going to kind of steer some conversations to Rob, because I feel like there's a underlying subtext in this question that really does reflect, you know, the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in because Courtney said earlier, you know, could I do it and still have the life that I wanted? And you know, that is the question in my own journey as a high school music teacher that really concerned me. You know, would it be possible for me to be successful and to be fully, genuinely who I am when I stand on the podium, when I get in front of the classroom, when I walk into a new community, you know, to do an honor band or something like that, where I have to get to work with people very quickly without us having a long relationship to build trust. How can I be totally visible and genuinely, authentically myself? And we all talked about that as we were writing and sharing our chapters. And that came out in layers in everybody's chapter. And I think it's really about unapologetically going from compartmentalization, where we put different parts of our lives in different places, to a real integration where, you know, it's okay to be a mom and a conductor. It's okay to be all of these different layers of identity that we all relate to. And I think we have to be more intentional, not in the oversharing way, you know, but we have to be really intentional in making sure that we're fully integrated when we show up, especially when we're working with young people. And it turns into less of a thing when it's just part of who you are. You express it authentically. It's part of who you are as an artist and how you got to where you are. And it makes a big difference when we can do that. So, you know, it's a coming out for all of us in different ways to show these layers of identity more publicly, more visibly.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob.
And Eric, I think that the teachers down the road, the road must live what they are espousing. They must live that. If you just talk, as we say in the community, talk is cheap. And if you believe that everyone should have a place at the table in your rehearsal room, then you hire someone that's this gay or female or Black or from Australia, and you put them beside you and you make them a wonderful demonstration of what you believe in. The rest of it is just a bunch of crap. And we've had a lot of crap going on. And I know it's not a highly intelligent word, but right now it just ticks me off because we say certain things, but we don't live the life that we choose to live. I'm from Atlanta. This is the home of John Lewis and Martin Luther King. I'm the home of the Civil Rights Movement. And it was developed in my hometown. And so they lost their lives to try to make America better. So it's time for band directors and wind band conductors and college professors to live the life that they say they want us to live. If not, then just move along.
Mm-hmm. Hear, hear. William Novak.
Yelling.
Oh, sorry. No. Yell all the way.
Write the book, everybody. It'll be great.
William Novak says, much respect to you all. I teach elementary school. What is the best way to discuss discrimination with younger kids? I teach preschool through the 8th grade, and I often want to bring these topics up with young students, but I don't know when it's appropriate to or not. Can kids ever be too young? Thanks so much.
I'd like
Yeah,
to
Joni.
say something to that. I think we just need to make it normal. I think you just program music by a wide range of different people. You talk about the music in Venezuela. You talk about the music in Japan. You talk about this composer from Scotland. You talk about, you know, a random woman from Australia. You know, exposed to and open to. It reminds me of a really beautiful story. There was a little boy who used, and he had lost a limb and he had a wooden leg, and he came with this, you know, and he was standing there with all these kids, and all these kids ran up to him and just said, you know, what's going on here? You know, why have you got that funny looking wooden leg on? And all these other kids just said, well, where's your other leg? What happened? He said, oh, it's just kind of on the inside. They went, oh, can you kick a footy? Yeah. All right, well, let's go and kick a footy. And then it was that. It was just all over. So I just think just keep them exposed to a wide range of different things, and it'll just become their new normal.
And I think to echo that, the idea of like normalcy, you know, I think one of the things that we talked about at the very end of this book was that, you know, hopefully one day we won't need to have a book like this. You know, that it'll just be, as Jodi was saying, it's normal, you know, to program all this different variety of music, you know, and that our programming really reflects the diversity that we have in our own classrooms. You know, and that's one of the things that I think about a lot is how can my programming for my own ensemble reflect the diversity that I have in my own ensemble, you know, with the students that I actually have in front of me. And so it really comes back to the idea of representation that really seems to be the kind of overarching topic or the subject of this talk today. Unfortunately, we only have 5 minutes left in this webinar. And again, I wanted to thank everyone for all the awesome questions. You know, I'll try and get through the questions. Maybe we can just send emails out, Alec. I'm not quite sure how we can do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Sorry,
just want
Alec,
to.
I'll let you.
Yeah, just want to thank everybody, this amazing panel, group of panelists, the incredible thinking that has gone into the book, the major contribution it is going to be to the wind band community. Again, we're so proud of it. We could go on for hours on this topic. This is just the start. And hopefully we'll think about other ways to creatively stay connected. There's still some amazing questions we didn't even have a chance to get to. And so we'll do our best to record all of these. This webinar is going to be posted to our YouTube channel in the next couple of days. So we'll send an e-blast out to everyone who's registered so that they can see that and they can share it out with their friends. please encourage everyone to watch this, to listen to these incredible stories, to learn more. I know I'm learning every day, and just and be open and be vulnerable, because we all have to learn in this moment to be better, and we all are never at the end of this journey. We're always along the journey, and it's an exciting journey to be along and to be a part of, and to experience and to see all the changes happening in American society, throughout the world, and in the wind band class for sure, and for me as a publisher. So thanks to all of you again. Really appreciate it. There's a coupon code, Horizon10, on the gimusic.com website for 10% off. Also, thank you to Alex Shapiro for the photograph that is on the cover. She's so incredibly talented. She's also an amazing photographer. It's a beautiful, beautiful photograph. So thank you for that. And just let's keep it going, and let's keep the conversation going. And again, thanks to everyone for being a part of this incredible webinar. Thanks so much.